I turned it in and I got called in to the head of the program. She's a wonderful woman. She was like, hey, like, I think you're spending too much time on this. Like, you need to relax a little bit. And I was like, all right, my bad. And then the lesson that I really learned time and time again from my boss, and not too many times, I wouldn't say that I'm constantly making a mistake, but just within equity research and within research at a bank, you need to learn when to say, I think I've done enough. And like, this is enough to make a fairly confident call. And then just be upfront about what you don't know.
Welcome to The Stroll Season 1. I'm your host, Sam Thompson. In this season, I'll work to engage in conversations that dive deep into the intricacies of each guest's unique career, while also bringing to light the reality of how each guest maintains their health in the professional culture they work in. This episode's guest is my very own brother, Sol Thompson. Sol graduated from Yale in 2022, majoring in fine art and environmental studies. Sol recently finished his Master's of Science in Sustainability Management at Columbia University, where he worked in the Porster lab focusing on subsurface geologic reservoirs. His personal focus was on carbon storage and the long-term feasibility of carbon storage projects, which he hopes to continue to investigate as he pursues a PhD in the field of sustainable finance. He also hosts a weekly podcast called Pair of Kings that focuses on men's fashion, style, and culture across New York City, Los Angeles, and London. He recently started writing about fashion on a Substack called One Size Fits All, which serves as a companion piece to Pair of Kings. If you're enjoying the podcast thus far, please take a moment to subscribe to stay updated and support the podcast. Thank you for listening to my spiel, and here's my conversation with Sol.
Hi, this is my dog Leo. He's sniffing my hand. I was gonna try and get him to bark for the podcast. I figure we could give that a shot for all the listeners. But he's intently staring at my hand. Leo, bark. Leo, speak. Woof. Woof. Big one. Leo, speak.
Leo,
Woof. There it is. Good boy.
That is our second guest of the day. You talked a little bit about geologic reservoirs. Is that when you actually build these technologies to perhaps suck carbon out of the air, actually getting them below the surface of the earth?
Yeah, sort of. So it's not just the technologies that suck carbon out of the air. We'd call that direct air capture, and that's one subsection of it. But there is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage that is essentially retrofitting coal-fired power plants with, usually it's wood pellets. They say bioenergy. So anything that you could burn that comes from the earth. So sometimes it's cast-offs from the lumber industry. Sometimes it's waste. There's a huge plant in, I think it's Iceland that burns a lot of waste. That's WTE, which is waste to energy. They will then retrofit those power plants with carbon capture technologies, which is then piped either off to a reservoir or ideally on top of an existing reservoir and then shot underground where it is then kept. We say indefinitely, but that's not true. There's a time frame and some of it mineralizes and some of it spreads, and it's hard exactly to say scientifically how long it'll stay down there, but over the scale of 10,000 to 100,000 100,000 years is how long you'd hope it would stay down there.
And from your perspective, working, I guess, at the intersection of, sustainability and academia and then the financial sector, how do you think the financial sector is actually doing in terms of promoting these goals of either, reducing carbon output or capturing carbon, either where it's produced or after it has been produced?
Do you want, I guess, do you want my personal opinion or the opinion of the financial sector?
Why don't you give the opinion of the financial sector and then sprinkle in at the end your personal outlook on it?
Sure. So the financial sector is difficult. It's very hard to get an industry, any industry, to move to decarbonize because it's spending money that they wouldn't have spent already. And a lot of the financial sector is slightly different, but I'll talk about sector trends in general. A lot of the time, let's just take manufacturing or automobiles or whatever it is. Or their supply chains are set up and so entrenched, right? It's vital to their operations that disrupting them is quite difficult. And so to decarbonize, you either have to retrofit existing plants or existing manufacturing fields or whatever it is, or you have to build it auxiliary and then switch over, which then you have costs of retraining, you have to hire new staff, you have to make sure that all of the old stuff is decommissioned properly. There's obviously a transition time. There's a big CapEx spend. There are a lot of considerations. And so for industries that are very carbon emission intensive or just carbon intensive, it can be very tough to get them to decarbonize. I think that from the outside looking in, it can seem very easy. But in reality, it really does disrupt the operations of that company. And while they'd like to, and while a lot of companies are looking towards decarbonization as a positive flag, something that is a value creator, something that they can use to indicate to stakeholders their commitments to the environment and sustainability and social commitments, things like that, the reality is sometimes it can be quite difficult, both from a monetary, from a time, and then from a just overall efficiency standpoint. So the really interesting thing about the financial sector and the tech sector as well, and I'll talk about it sort of as I talk about the financial sector, is that as an industry, they have very low carbon intensities because they don't manufacture anything. Mostly, I mean, I worked at Morgan Stanley, to use them as an example. Their main carbon emissions come from lighting and heat of their buildings. The problem is that if I talk about scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, we know what those are?
Yeah, but why don't you explain them?
Sure. So really quickly, scope 1 and 2 is basically emissions coming from manufacturing, either transport or the actual manufacture of goods. Scope 3 are indirect emissions caused by your operations. And so to give an example that is relevant to the financial sector, financed emissions are a huge focus right now for the finance industry. And financed emissions are essentially, if I buy 50,000 shares in Exxon, do I need to then take responsibility for some of their emissions? And so there's a big debate going on right now. There are a couple of like TFCD or TCFD, excuse me, which is sort of the climate benchmarking system for the financial sector, I think is being updated. Essentially, the EU is really pushing financed emissions and emissions calculations for the financial sector in the EU. In the US, we're lagging behind. We were going to have the SEC rolling out reporting requirements for scope 1, 2, and 3. I think that's now gotten scaled back to just scope 1, maybe scopes 1 and 2, and even that is under debate. Most likely under President Trump, it will get struck down or just be sort of stuck in litigation hell, as it were. So this is all to say that the financial industry as a sector that has a good amount of oversight, reporting requirements that they can adhere to because it's quite easy to calculate your emissions, maybe save for finance emissions. 3, the motivation to do things, because a lot of these banks, to designate from one another, it gets quite hard, right?
Yeah.
Like if I asked you, as somebody who hasn't necessarily worked in banking, to tell me the difference between Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, could you just rattle off the...
No,
right?
Certainly not.
So some of these banks are using them as value creation, something to designate themselves. And then the other big motivator is that with a lot of these new technologies like direct air capture, to force down the cost curve because they're so expensive to operate, they require a lot of upfront investments.
Yeah.
And by investing in them, again, using Morgan Stanley, I think they just bought 40,000 advanced credits from a direct air capture project. They then allow themselves to purchase future credits, so they get first dibs, and get to do it at a price premium while also forcing the cost curve down. So that's part of the motivation. And then to sort of wrap it up, or let's, I guess, recount quite quickly. Some of the motivators are, it's a big value creator. They're forcing down the cost curves. They have low inherent emissions, and so if they're buying high quality carbon reductions, or they not technically calling them offsets, but offsets, they can get to net zero quite quickly.
Yeah.
And then because they're doing that, they can set pretty ambitious goals and adhere to them. And it's a big sort of sis boom ba point in a lot of media that shows that a company like a bank is still willing to make change inherently or internally without disrupting their own practices. And again, there's so much nuance to this. I think BlackRock was trying to, or I think the teachers union in Texas was forced to divest out of BlackRock because BlackRock was making commitments aligned with ESG principles, which Texas deemed, I either think, unconstitutional or illegal.
Wow.
essentially the argument is if you're focusing too much on ESG considerations, you are potentially gating yourself from future returns because you're locking out of certain industries, and that's not doing your fiduciary duty. The banks then are arguing that ESG is just a lens for risk, and by doing that, they are doing the fiduciary duty. So again, it's a huge nuanced conversation. Nobody really knows the answers, and then sort of the ultimate problem in all of this is nobody wants to stick their neck out too far. It can be really hard as a bank to put a big bet on this and fail, either because if it fails and you get a bunch of backlash and everybody's like, oh, what an idiot, I think it may have been McKinsey bought a bunch of carbon offsets I think it was Delta bought a bunch of carbon offsets, and they were just junk, like complete bogus, and they came under a ton of fire. There was a lawsuit from a woman that claimed that those offsets motivated her to buy tickets and was seeking damages, like essentially greenwashing. Greenwashing is essentially claiming something is green or environmentally friendly when it isn't. It can land you in a lot of hot water. And so all of these companies are essentially doing this thing. It's almost like a turtle race, right? Where somebody's going to get ahead, but how fast can a turtle move, right? Like you can only get a couple of steps ahead. And then everybody else catches up, and then somebody else is like towing the line. It's very slow, and especially within the financial industry where they do have a motivation to do it, it can be quite disheartening to see the speed at which it's moving. But then also, a lot of very new and novel technologies are getting funding and working because of the financial sector. I don't want to just sit here and be like, it's terrible.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, they are doing quite a bit to their credit. And on top of all of it, they don't have to do any of it. It's all internally motivated.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think, you mentioned McKinsey. That's, where I worked for a year and a half. But part of my work there was actually on the other side of the coin in climate adaptation. So there's a whole point in kind of mitigating your carbon footprint. But the reality of the situation is natural disasters are only going to become more prevalent. It's not something that we're going to avoid. We know that the planet is warming. So how can businesses, public entities, and things such as hospitals protect themselves from these natural disasters and ultimately kind of make an upfront investment to mitigate the damage that will happen when, per se, a hurricane comes and ravages an area. And it is pretty interesting to see the friction that will happen within a company trying to do these things, because it really is making an upfront investment for something that may or may not happen in the next 10 years. And if you make that investment, there's going to be a massive payoff. But if you make that investment and that big hurricane doesn't come, or that 1 in 100-year event doesn't happen, then, you spent money mitigating a risk that didn't ultimately come to fruition.
Yep. Are you aware of catastrophe bonds, cat bonds?
No.
So it's a mechanism that hedge funds are trying to use, or that they are using, to mitigate some of the potential risk and some of the financial burdens of some of these nations. So the way that they work and the way that I understand them, and I may have to sort of stumble my way through this because this wasn't my area of expertise, but I do think it's interesting, is essentially a hedge fund will go to a sovereign nation, let's say Haiti, and say, Haiti, you've been struggling with hurricanes. We'll just use hurricanes as this one example. But in general, severe weather. What we're going to do is we're going to offer you a catastrophe bond where we will provide to you a certain amount of money. And I think the way in which it works is we're going to hold $500 million and we'll sell it to you at a premium. And if that natural disaster occurs, you can cash out and take out that bond at a premium. It's sort of like insurance. But if it doesn't, you're just going to pay us that premium and it's not going to cash. So, and there are ways to sort of bet on severe weather as well. Whether it be purchasing like oil and gas futures, things like that, things that nations will need to recover, which is, again, sort of a moral hazard, but it's a way for entities to essentially bet on the weather. And with forecast modeling becoming so much better, with severe weather becoming so much more common, it is, again, like a new area, a new way to play, essentially, for the environment. And I don't know the name of the hedge fund, but they made a killing a couple years in a row selling and buying these catastrophe bonds.
Fascinating. You talk about the improvement of modeling. Part of my work at McKinsey was with this climate adaptation team, and they were building a geospatial model that could predict flood risk by 3 meter by 3 meter plots. I think I have that correct. So anywhere in the world in a 3 meter by 3 meter plot, it can give some sort of approximation of the flood risk of that plot of land.
Interesting.
And it has really interesting applications when you think about real estate developments, and, purchasing properties and the risk that comes along with them. Again, the main problem we actually encountered was actually bringing it to clients and having people, want to make that voluntary upfront investment to mitigate the risk down the line, because the returns aren't as defined. And there's no guarantee that you will see a return from those investments. So actually, in a time that I was working there, when the economy was a little bit more uncertain, people didn't want to make these big investments and really wanted to, I think, bear down on unnecessary spending. Seeing kind of the friction that arose to actually push that type of work to clients and get them to make those investments was really interesting. And it shows you just how difficult these things are, because if there isn't maybe some alternate benefit to those adaptations, some people are just kind of willing to, I guess, roll the dice.
Did you find that there was a way that you could pitch the tool or the project or sort of its use case that would have skeptics, and I'm sure people were skeptical for different causes, but skeptics in general, be more receptive to the tool itself?
Part of my work that I did that was really interesting was for electric utility companies. It's very very detrimental when storms come through. The longer the power's out, it's reduced revenues. I'm sure there's some sort of regulations. This was a while ago, so I don't remember off the top of my head, that impact them if the power is out for too long.
Sure.
And one application that they were using of these models was to better inform the maintenance around their power lines. So what lines should we prioritize to trimming? What lines shouldn't we? If you're going to be trimming trees around, a dead end where if the power goes out, 5 homes are out of power, versus maybe more of a main street where if, a power line goes down, you have 2,000 homes out of power, kind of balancing the prioritization of the maintenance around those lines was one pretty interesting application that I found, and also was a little bit more prevalent because you could really quantify those returns.
Sure.
Because power outages are a lot more common than per se a massive flooding incident.
So I imagine that this tool would be incredibly attractive to just a pure insurance company, right? Like house or renters insurance, even just with flooding. Was that a hard sell? I imagine that was quite easy. Do they have arbitrary models?
I think a lot of different models are probably better for different things. And I would assume that I'm not sure if we were selling the model one-off to insurance companies or so on and so forth, but I'm sure they would, be interested, and I actually would be surprised if they weren't developing those in-house to really make it as granular as possible for their intents and purposes. But I'd like to maybe switch gears a little bit here.
Sure.
You mentioned this past summer you were working at Morgan Stanley. I'd love to hear how that experience was, and you obviously have a diverse set of hobbies and interests, such as your podcast. You're in grad school now, and I'm sure you have a host of other hobbies that we could discuss here. But how was that experience at Morgan Stanley in balancing the commitments of a intense job in finance with kind of maintaining what you enjoy and love to do outside of work?
Yeah. So I think you were raised the same way, or my brother. Had two parents that really emphasized hard work and working really hard and giving your all, and not really half-assing it. And I signed on to Morgan Stanley I was one of very few people selected for the Sustainable Finance Fellowship, or the Sustainable Investing Fellowship, SIF. It's a wonderful program. I really, if anybody is listening and seems interested and is in graduate school, we'll be more than happy to talk to you about it, because I think it's a wonderful opportunity. But I was only going to be at the company for 3 months, and they make it very clear that it will not lead to a return offer. Like, you cannot attain a return offer by doing the program. And so some other things are going on in my personal life. I was going through a breakup, really just not doing too hot. And so I was like, all right, I have 10 weeks at this company. I'm just going to go balls to the wall. They're giving me essentially the reins in a project that I am personally really interested in. I still can't talk too much about it, but I was working in carbon dioxide removal, sort of what I was talking about earlier. And while I'm at this company, while I have all these resources available to me, while I have all these experts available to me, I might as well make as much of it as possible. And so there was that aspect of the job. And then on top of it, I was in equity research, but also working with a fixed income team. And so I was the first person to be picked for research, I think in 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
And the way that it works is they put in a request for the team, you interview, and then if they find a good match, they will take somebody. But I was the first person to sort of fit the bill in a couple of years. And because I was sitting between fixed income and equity, I did all of the projects of both teams as training.
Wow.
Which was sort of a mistake. I just didn't clock it as one. I was like, well, if I'm going to be doing both, might as well learn both. But sort of an overlap. And then I also had responsibilities for the Sustainable Investing Fellowship. So I was essentially getting trained for 3 teams and doing the work of 3 teams on top of my own work. And I had never worked at a bank. I didn't know, again, it's a personal failing, how much I could go to my boss and say, hey, it seems like I'm really overwhelmed. This sort of feels off.
Yeah.
I was just sort of operating under the assumption that you're at a bank. It's going to be very intense. You're going to be doing a lot of work. Just sort of stay quiet and get everything done. If you have to stay longer to get that work done, just do it. And so I can talk about one of the projects. It was really fun. For equity research, they had a pretty open-ended question, but they asked us to backdate and test Puxatawny Phil, the groundhog, and his predictions based on the actual weather. And so I built a model that essentially scraped through weather modeling in Pennsylvania and then globally to, in my opinion, definitively return when spring had sprung every year and then test the predictions against it. And it took me like 2 weeks. I was staying 4 hours longer every day, building out this model, testing different things. I would go home, and you're not allowed to work on Python in the office unless you get approval. And I hadn't gotten approval, so I would come home and do Python modeling. And I was going to try and build a machine learning model as Puxatawny Phil. Again, I had these huge grand plans.
Yeah.
Turns out a lot of the other kids were just like, it was like a 5-hour project. I just completely lost the plot. So I turned it in, and I got called in to the head of the program. She's a wonderful woman. She was like, hey, I think you're spending too much time on this. You need to relax a little bit. And I was like, all right, my bad. And then the lesson that I really learned time and time again from my boss, and not too many times, I wouldn't say that I'm constantly making a mistake, but just within equity research and within research at a bank, you need to learn when to say, I think I've done enough. Yeah. And this is enough to make a fairly confident call. And then just be upfront about what you don't know. Yeah. I was coming from lab work and lab research where you have to be really certain. Oh, yeah. And there's a thing that happens called scope creep where you're doing a project and you realize something else is relevant and you sort of expand out to include that. It just keeps happening. Oh, yeah. And I was letting that happen in the office. Yeah. So I was working, this is all to say, I was working probably minimum 80 to 85 hours a week. Wow, yeah. In office. I again, was going through a breakup, having a really hard time. You do that for a couple of weeks. I was peaking at 100 something hours a week. I was working weekends. And there were days that I would leave the office, fall asleep in a car home, and sort of wake up again at my desk, which is really eerie. And Leo, thankfully, was at my grandmother's house, so I could really, afford to focus solely on my work. But it was a pretty rough time. I think I took 2 weekends off, one of them because I had food poisoning, and one of them I was just sick, physically ill. Yeah. I want to be clear, I don't think that's necessarily Morgan Stanley's fault. There's definitely an environment of pressure. But, all of my coworkers would show up at 8:30 or 9. Or if they showed up later, they'd be doing work and they'd be online at 8:15. Yeah. And they were all mostly out of the office by 6. And there were some days that were shorter. Some, Fridays, people would be like, yeah, it's 4 o'clock. I'm not going to sit here and wait for calls. APAC's already out. EU's already out. There's no point. I don't think I did a very good job of setting boundaries, but then also I really wanted to get the most out of my experience there and my time there. So I really proud of what I built. I built a model that modeled out a ton of pricing for different carbon dioxide reduction projects that I will still stand by. I think it's a really good model. Yeah. There's some stuff I would have loved to add, and my research right now is sort of complementing it. I don't know when that report will come out, but I'm very happy with the work that I did, and I'm super, super thankful for the experience.
Yeah, and it is a very big push and pull on these jobs in terms of the time you do put in, you get more out of it, but there's diminishing returns to scale there. Yeah. And finding the best way to, I think, get the most out of everything that you're doing, not just work, whether it's, getting into the gym, spending time with family, friends, and then I'd say more of the work adjacent learning that isn't necessarily working on the projects that are in front of you, but that kind of complement them and that it is fun to learn about and makes you even more excited for your core work streams is really important. I remember in my most intense stint, consulting is nice, or at least McKinsey is nice in a way that it's all really contained to Monday through Friday when you're working. Sometimes you're flying out on Sunday night. Sure. And occasionally I would do something like my timesheet or just clean my inbox on a Sunday.
Yeah.
But when you do work maybe 85 hours, maybe on the worst week 90 from Monday through Friday, I remember I would get to the weekend and I'd almost feel like I was getting sick Saturday, Sunday every week, because you just almost have this adrenaline crash.
Yeah.
And then I'd find I wouldn't have any energy. I wouldn't be too excited for the weekend because all I really wanted to do was sleep, and then I'd work out and feel a little bit better. But then, hey, on my worst project, I was finishing anywhere on Friday night from about 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Actually, no, that's not true. 1 a.m. I think was the worst night. But, you finish at 1 a.m. on Saturday morning. I would sleep Saturday till maybe noon or 1 p.m., wake up, eat a healthy meal, work out, and then, oh, hey, I'm flying tomorrow night again. It feels like my whole weekend is 24 hours. And it is very difficult. But I think finding that balance and knowing when to close your laptop and shut down is a really important skill, because investing in the other areas of your life does make you more productive when you are actually on the job. And that's not to say that, hey, 40 hours a week, I'm capping it. But, sometimes I would think that 80 to 85th hour that I was working, I didn't really get all too much done. And, if I could have taken 45 minutes back each day of the week to go on a walk, exercise, maybe hit that 7 hours of sleep, would have really paid dividends for me in my work and actually improve my work performance. And I'm curious, in your time at Morgan Stanley, were you able to keep any sort of consistent sleep or workout schedule, or did you kind of throw those out the side?
I wasn't working out, and I think it's interesting the nature of the work at Morgan Stanley, or how much work there is to do, especially they essentially just handed me the reins of a project and said, do it as you will. And I could see my boss working really hard, which was a motivator for me, but it was different. I had worked in the public sector at the city of Boston, and, you're in the office for 8 or 9 hours a day, but you're not doing active, focused work for 8 or 9 hours. It is slightly different. I was at a startup, which was, huge on work-life balance. And again, not hyper intense focused work for 8 hours a day. There's off times. You can go and get a meal. You can walk, get a coffee. You can take your dog outside, take a breather. When I was at Morgan Stanley, and this may have been just me and my reaction to doing the work, but I was working laser focused for 12 to 14 hours a day, which is so eerie again, because you sit down.
It's exhausting.
I'd get into the office at 6, you'd blink and you'd go eat lunch. I would eat lunch at my desk, and then you'd blink again and there'd be 8, and then I'd order in from Seamless or whatever the Grubhub, whatever equivalent was. And then I'd blink again and it'd be 10:15 and the lights would be going off, and I'd be like, what's happening?
Yeah. The day goes by.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And so you end up doing things, I think, to sort of keep you sane in the office. I wasn't sleeping that much. I was sleeping probably 4 or 5 hours a night, which wasn't great. And I think if you do that for a prolonged period, your brain just falls apart.
Yeah.
I wasn't working out. I was eating healthy, which is good, but I lost a bunch of weight. I just wasn't hungry at all. I drank a lot of coffee. But I would listen to one song for 16 hours straight.
Wow.
I went through and I listened to Grimes's Art Angels, which is a great album, for 3 days straight.
Wow.
There was just stuff that I was doing that I was I need something to break up, because every day feels exactly the same. And you go and you put in music, and I would usually listen to classical music or really heavy house music while doing my model, just something not to distract myself. But I was you do that for 3 weeks and it just sort of like mushes into this
Oh,
one
yeah.
weird time sphere. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna see how far I can take this. I'll listen to the same song for 16 hours and see if,
Mm-hmm.
it bothered. I don't know what was going through my mind.
Yeah, I remember that I would, tell the other analyst sitting next to me on this one project that spanned, I think, from November to February when it's the winter in New York, the
Yeah.
sun's going down at like 4:30. And I
Yeah.
remember at sunset every day, I'd think in my mind, like, I have 6 or 7 more hours left here.
Yep.
And it was almost kind of like you said, an eerie feeling of, wow, the sun's going down and I almost have another full day of work ahead of me.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know if it was McKinsey or Goldman Sachs, but you've seen the analyst happiness survey that they do
Yeah.
every year, where it's like, how did you feel coming in? It was like everybody was so excited, and then it's
Yeah.
like 1 year removed. Like, how do you feel about life? And everybody's like, I'm hopeless. Like,
Yeah.
so again, I think these jobs are really good for learning, and I again, like, I will stand by, I will fight that the experience of Morgan Stanley that I had was instrumental in illuminating what kind of work it takes to put out a model like that,
Yeah.
how it is to collaborate and have people help. The only other problem is that I was sort of the expert at the company in this field.
Yeah.
So it was very hard to ask people. And I had to tie in a lot of sort of disparate information because in your research, you're not allowed to cross the veil or pierce the veil. So you can't talk, technically it was fixed income research, so I couldn't talk to the equity or the public facing people.
I see.
I'm sorry, I was in equity. I couldn't talk to the public facing people about what I was doing. So I had to ask questions that were couched in like they had a sense of what I was doing, but you couldn't just say like, hey, how do I price this? How do I, what number do I use here? You'd be like, if I needed to think about X, where would I look?
Yeah.
And like they'd hope that you get an idea. Like, so it's a really wonderful learning experience. I'm sure you'd say McKinsey was a great learning experience. Really gave you an idea of the professional world. I also will say, I think it's a very warped idea of the professional world because everybody at these companies has been sort of like on the top of their game and at the top of their group for so long, and that's what these companies recruit and hire for. It gives you like a warped sense of how quick something can be done and how competent everybody can be.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not to talk down on anybody, but like, again, I was working at the city of Boston, and if something didn't get done by 5, people would be like, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. We'll get it done tomorrow. And that was fine. The nature of the environment at these elite companies is that if something is not done by 5, you will stay until 10 and get it done.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. McKinsey, I mean, when you're having meetings with clients every other day and partners every day, things need to be done and there needs to be tangible progress. If you have a meeting with a partner, say 10 a.m., and then they drop time on your calendar for 5 or 6, in that 4 or 5 hours, tangible progress needs to happen. So it's a lot of, at least for me on the more intense projects, it's lunch at your desk, dinner at your desk. And it's tough to grapple with when, hey, I wanted to get in the gym. I would work out at the gym maybe from 11 to 12. If I could get there by 11:30, finish by 12:30, get to bed by 1, I'd get, 6.5, 7 hours of sleep. That was a trade-off I'd make on some nights, but it really is, things need to get done. And if you're working on a 6-week project for a client, in that 6 weeks, you can't really slack off a lot because 6 weeks, that's 30 days. Every day of that project is 3 to 4% of the time you have to get all that work done. So it needs to get done. But I think 2 things actually McKinsey did incredibly well is that they have such a wide range of experts that on any given project, when we needed to learn about something or didn't have an idea what we were doing, there was always someone in the company that was competent and knowledgeable in that area. I'd say the one friction is actually, everybody is so busy, so getting time on their calendar was a completely different thing. And I think that does actually lead to stress when, someone has the expertise you need, but maybe they're only free 2 days from now and, you have a meeting and, on that day they're offering you time. Totally. And then the other thing McKinsey does really well, which I think for me as a bigger guy is really, really nice, is their meal credit was $60 a night.
Holy shit.
Yeah, so you eat. I always thought one thing that was wonderful is I wasn't going hungry. I wasn't, I think you're almost forced to order in every night at these jobs. It's really would be a time suck to be running around, or you'd end up just having to go to the same place to eat every day. So being able to actually have like a real dinner food wise, I'd still, a lot of times be in front of my desk, was really, really nice. So,
The one thing that pissed me off about Morgan Stanley, and it's the only gripe that I'll actually pick with the company, far be it for me to tell them how to run anything, coffee wasn't subsidized.
Wow.
There are free coffee machines, but it tastes like cigarette butts.
Wow.
Like, there was one experience I had in college where I was at a party and I put my drink down and I wasn't looking and I grabbed another drink and I like went to drink it and it was a cup full of cigarette ash.
Oh.
And I like stopped myself, but that smell and like the taste in your mouth is exactly the same as the free coffee at Morgan Stanley. And so the coffee downstairs, it's not much. It's $3. But I'm like, guys, like, you have a company full of people who are pumping out work. Just give them free coffee. Like, it would not impact your bottom line. Just please.
Yeah, I don't drink too much coffee, and I've tried to stay away.
Yeah.
But I would reserve it for those really difficult weeks.
Of course.
Like later in the week, that's when I'm going to have my coffee. And in NYO for McKinsey, there's a barista bar.
What is NYO?
New York office.
Okay.
So they have it's a massive office. I think, not everyone's going into the office every day because you're traveling, and if you can work remote, it's nice to take that opportunity. But maybe I think 2,000 people align with the New York office, and it's usually pretty full. There's 4 floors on the World Trade Center, incredible view, really nice office, but they have this barista bar. And I remember talking to one of my buddies who I started with. I actually went to school with him as well, so we've known each other for a bit now, and he was going through kind of a pretty brutal stretch, and he said, I feel so proud the barista at the barista bar knows my order. So I just walk up and,
Sure.
3 coffees a day to push through is not the, happiest thing to think about, but at least McKinsey has the barista bar, they're not charging you for it. And then that $60 meal credit really, really does help out.
Yeah, we got, I think it was $30, and you had to order after a certain hour.
Yeah.
So I think if you stayed in the office past 8, you could eat there. So the ordering would open at 7.
Okay.
And then you would have to tap in after 8, or else your manager would get a call and be like, hey, what's happening here?
Yeah, we have a similar policy, but it's extremely flexible. I think it's your need to be in the office past 8. But if you wanted to, a lot of nights I would know, like, hey, just to get the work done in the most efficient way possible, I should be here till, 10:30, 11, 12. Because if I leave, my manager leaves, and then I need something from them, or one of my teammates leaves and I need something from them, I got to Slack them, set up a Zoom meeting. Whereas if they're right around the corner, that interaction and that, exchange of knowledge happens so much faster.
Yeah.
So if I knew, hey, I'm going to be here till 11 or 12 tonight, we might place an order at 5:30, get the food at 6:30, and then you're eating a little earlier, because it is tough to actually wait. If you're going to order at 8 and then the food gets there at 9, you're eating dinner so late.
Yeah.
And additionally, some of the partners or associate partners would sometimes stop around at like 5:30 or 6 if they were still there and be like, where's the dinner order? So on some teams it would be, get that extra bowl, get that extra item, and then if the partner or associate partner comes around, they'll be overjoyed to find some food with their name on it.
Sure. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think that one of the things I took away from working at a big company like that is just things are expected to happen so fast.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to, I think, keep pace for an extended period of time, especially as a junior, where the expectation is that you can do that for 2 years is usually the contract length that, Goldman Sachs or McKinsey or BlackRock or whatever it is, Jane Street. And once you do that, the work won't diminish, but you'd be good enough at operating at such a high level that you know sort of what you can and can't do to get your stuff done. And it is really like an intensive train. I mean, they're sort of just training you to be incredible at your job. But again, it sort of comes at the expense. If you look at those Goldman, analyst surveys at your well-being and your mental health and your social life. I asked a lot of people at Morgan Stanley, like, hey, I'm curious about what it is sort of outside of work, but to work here full time. What does it mean for your social life? What does it mean for dating? What does it mean for hobbies? What does it mean for exercise? And a lot of people exercise, but most people at the company who are in relationships met their partner before they started or in the company. And that was something I was like, okay, that's interesting. And again, I wouldn't like pry too much. I'd just be like, out of curiosity, what is it like? And a lot of people were married. Um, but it does seem like working at these companies, you do trade a certain amount of your time for your passions. And, I if I'm on a train in New York, I'm usually reading, if I have a book, or listening to music, or trying to catch up on work on my phone. But, um, I'd be going to work in the morning and I noticed like I'd be on the train. I'd have my book in my bag and it was just never get rid. I would be reading the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, sort of kept up to date on The Economist. I would have notifications set for Science Direct or Elsevier or whatever it is to keep up with research papers and things like that. And again, I was incredibly well versed in this one area, but I felt like all of the other things that I do now, podcast, taking care of my dog, reading, cooking, all of these auxiliary interests that I love to do and really, give me energy. I just physically did not have time for. And it's really hard.
Yeah, for me, I started to think about, I think it's actually incredibly valuable and worthwhile at this age in life to make that investment in a field and
of course
become, the expert and have that domain expertise. But I really started to think about, okay, what do I want to become the expert in?
Sure.
So that when later in my life, if I'm married and have kids and there's all these other responsibilities that can't necessarily be put by the wayside, like these other interests I have now, what is going to be the expertise that I'm happy with and that's going to allow me to do the 50, 60 hour a week job in a field that I want to. And for me, that answer right now
50,
was
60 hours would be a dream. I'd be so happy with that.
Oh yeah, I remember on a really intense 3-4 month stint, one night our manager had actually been on a week of PTO and then gotten engaged. And when he got back, the first day he got back, he let the other analyst and I out at 8 p.m. He was like, no, you guys clearly have been working very, very hard over these past 2 months. Just get out of here. We'll pick up tomorrow. And I remember walking out at 8 p.m. with the other analyst and being like, wow, I feel like I have so much time on my hands. I feel like I could do anything right now. I have, 4 hours before and then I could get to bed at 12.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, my manager had no idea of this, and I wasn't giving him a lot of advance warning, so it was difficult for me to plan for. But that night, one of my close friends was premiering a movie that he had directed to me and my other friends. And
sure.
So I was able to get there. I didn't think I was going to be able to be there. And that was just a really nice moment to actually be able to be there for my friend, see his movie. And when I say movie, I mean a full production. Cinema quality, it was all color graded. The sound was just incredible. And so we premiered it there, and then about 6 or 7 months later, he did a one-night only movie premiere open to the greater public, and it was just incredible. The movie, hopefully I'm not messing this up, is called Wasted, and my friend is Ben Klein. So if you are interested in film and that movie is released, go check it out. It's a wonderful film, and I had a absolute blast not only watching the film, but kind of seeing my friend invest themselves into something they were so passionate about and ultimately seeing it all come together in such a wonderful way.
The one thing I will also throw in that I think is not talked about a lot, but there are certain institutions that I think a lot of people idealize coming out of Yale, where we both went, or Columbia, like McKinsey or like Morgan Stanley or whatever it is, where there is definitely a culture of, well, some of them, there's sort of a culture of partying, right? Like Goldman Sachs, I know, or I think JP Morgan as well. If you are doing, or on certain teams, it's expected that on, I think, Fridays, you'll go out with the team and stay out until like 2 a.m, and it's very intense. But as somebody who's in research, working very long hours, and I say this very affectionately as a nerd, everybody there is a nerd. Nobody's going to go out and throw a rager. Everybody just, for the most of the time, goes home. I like going out and I like being social, and some of my friends would have events. And when I was there, I felt such a pressure to have fun because it felt like my only opportunity to do that. And it turns those social situations into a weird, almost like facsimile of like of being able to enjoy it, because you're there, but you're so stressed about having a good time, and like, oh, this is like the one night a week that I'm gonna like do something fun. It's 9 o'clock and I've got like an hour and a half before I'm like scheduled to go home. Like, I have to have a good time, and obviously in doing that you're really stressed and you're really high strung. I was going to events and I would meet people and I would have no idea who they were. Would not be able to recall a face or a name. Like, you're not only so tired and like wired from your job, but you're so stressed from doing it that I think it makes it really hard to actually be present and just enjoy it and relax.
One learning for me was that you can't just kind of show up somewhere and expect your friends to all of a sudden kind of catch you up and then jump right back into things. If, you know, you're only seeing them every 3-4 weeks. It really is almost like in all facets of life, a consistency game. And I actually started to think that, hey, like the 12-hour workday is something that, you know, I can be happy with and fit things in. You know, I could work 9 to 5, 9 to 6. There's 9 hours right there. Go maybe have a real dinner, maybe work out, call a friend, and then get those other, 3 hours of work done later at night. And that's more manageable when you have a little bit of flexibility. But especially in these jobs when things are so fast paced and you're at the junior level, you really do cognizantly need to realize, hey, I'm going to sacrifice my control here. I'm not going to be able to, kind of like you said, enjoy something every single day. So there is that added pressure of when you do have time on the weekends to really, really enjoy it. And then for me, it's just, again, goes back to, really cognizantly thinking, what do I want to make that sacrifice for? And is it going to be worth it on the back end? And you mentioned partying at these companies. I think McKinsey has a, honestly, very, very great culture of everybody is included within a team. I never once felt like there was any kind of, I was ever being excluded from anything. And, I think everyone is very, very welcoming. But one thing for me, as someone who doesn't drink a lot, I've basically been sober for the past 3 months. I've had one drink or drank on one day in the past 3 months. Is that there is, on some teams, an environment of, hey, we're going to be working really, really, really hard. But then when we do maybe have a team event once every 2 or 3 weeks, there's going to be not a ton of drinking. And this only happened on one team, but there was drinking at a pace where if I tried to keep up with, I would have made it a complete fool out of myself. I actually just kind of realized, hey, I can say, hey, I'm not drinking, and not feel a pressure to keep up.
Interesting.
But it is almost for me, I wouldn't say I was necessarily a bystander and everyone makes their own decisions, but you'd see some people who really, really could hold their alcohol and have it not affect them. And then other people in the team dynamic, I think everyone wants to feel like they're, a part of the fun.
For sure.
And then people try to keep up. There's, 4 tequila shots being done throughout the night. And then you see the people who maybe can't keep up in terms of the drinking. And again, nothing bad happens. Everyone just calls an Uber home. But then I remember going into the office on, the next day on a Friday, if people were out on Thursday, and just being like, I can't imagine being here, especially if it was, a Wednesday or Thursday when we'd come in after it. I can't imagine being here and knowing the day of work I'm about to have if I was hammered the night before. Some people are able to do it. Some people get through it, but I think that also comes at a, physical and mental expense as well.
Yeah, I also just want to emphasize, I don't know exactly what your listenership will be like or who will listen to this in the future, and I just do want to stipulate, like, I don't think that this is normal to work this much at such an age. I think that there is a time for it, and honestly, it is probably post-grad, to really apply and work really hard. But I think that there, and I'm not very good at it, but just in general, there has to be some sort of balance struck between having a life and being able to step away from your work, do things that genuinely make you happy, that you are setting aside time for, and then when you can, when you can go go into the office, work hard, become an expert, and really apply yourself. And again, that's why I went back to grad school. It gives you the time to do that at a slightly more relaxed pace and sort of at your own cadence, which is nice. Working for 3 months at 85 to 100 hours a week was genuinely harrowing. It was really difficult. It was, again, very intrinsically, like, I wanted to do it very badly. For myself, like, there's an area I really care about and an area that I, am going to hopefully explore for 5 years over a PhD. Yeah. Right? So I know what I'm getting myself into, but I would not let... I think you are a good example in that you took your time at the company and used it to frame what you would like to be an expert in the future, and not necessarily letting or being told what to do for 2 years and being in an area that you're only tangentially interested in, and then killing yourself in order to make that work. Obviously, do well at your job, exceed, expectations. Do not just sit there and do nothing. But make sure that your job is not necessarily your life. And I think that there does need to be a life outside of just work.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine working at that pace for a year. Something would have broken, whether it be me or not. And, I have friends and I know people who have had to take or were forced to take leaves from work.
Wow.
Because of mental breakdowns. One of the people I know lost like 30 to 40 pounds and had a seizure in the office.
Yeah.
Because they were expected to work such long hours and they were essentially forced to. Somebody else, lost a very long-term partner who everybody thought that they were going to end up together, sort of thing, because of work. Like, your work matters and being an expert matters, but your personal life and your personal well-being also matter a lot. And again, don't, I think, lose sight of that, because down the road, being an expert in something is worth a lot, but that shouldn't come at the expense of your ability to actually, I think the point is, once you step away from work and you have time to do other things, you need to have other things to do. And it's very hard to just pick up and do that in your 30s or 40s, even in your 20s. And I think that there is a lot of important social development and personal development that happens in your 20s outside of work, whether it be learning how to speak to people, learning how to include people in a conversation, learning how to, again, just be social and network, or, not even network, but just make friends.
Yeah.
There's a lot of development there that, isn't going to convey on a resume, but will be incredibly helpful in your life.
And at these companies, it also is maybe a little bit of a facade that everybody has to put up with these hours.
Of course.
I'm getting through it. Everything's great.
Yep.
But kind of you mentioned those stories. So many people you'll talk to when you have these conversations, you'll hear of people who, miss a family member's deathbed because they're, traveling for work.
Yeah.
They had to go to the hospital because some, medical issue was exacerbated. And these things really do take a toll, and it's almost sometimes creates this disillusion in your mind that, hey, everybody is doing it and everybody's okay.
Yeah.
Why, I shouldn't be, prioritizing these other things, or, sacrificing these other things that I love, when in reality, everybody else is struggling too. And, really tangible circumstances and difficulties arise because of it.
Yeah. And huge credit, and I'll say their name because I think they do really deserve it. Stephen Bird, who was my boss at Morgan Stanley for the group that I was in, made it very clear. First of all, I met him very briefly, my second day actually in the office in the elevator. He was like, "Oh, you're Sol, right? You work, in my," or I think he was like, "Hey, are you one of the interns here?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm actually a fellow. It's a little bit different." He's like, "Oh, you're on my team." And I was like, "Yeah." Shook his hand, introduced myself. "Hey, I'm Solomon." He was traveling to do, sales, things like that. 2 weeks later, I was in the elevator. He was heading out. I was going down for dinner. And he was like, "Hey, Solomon, how are you? How are you doing? And how's the group?" And I was like, "Oh my God, you remembered my name.
Yeah.
That was really nice." But I made time, when he was back to talk and catch up. First of all, incredibly intelligent guy, really good at just conveying ideas, really kind. And he was like, "Hey, I know the culture here. I know what it's like. I just want to make it clear, if you ever need time off, just take it.
Yeah.
We're not going to get mad. You don't need to sit here and justify it. If a family member is sick, or if you are ill, just stay home. You're doing this fellowship. I'm sure you really want this. I'm not going to see you differently if essentially the point he made is he'd see me worse for skipping out on a family member's deathbed than if I failed on a deliverable by 8 hours, something like that. Right. So huge credit to him. And it was very just "Hey, I want you to know that I mean this. This isn't just lip service that I'm doing for the company." And somebody on our team had, I think, a family member go ill, and they just disappeared for a week, and nobody cared.
Wow,
It was
wonderful.
like, oh, are they around?
Mhm.
No, they're out. And it was like, okay, great.
Yeah. And it really is a friction sometimes, and you really have to be okay with, at McKinsey, you're rated 1 through 5. 80% of people fall into a 3. You almost have to just realize
A 3 or below, or just a 3?
just a 3.
Oh.
And then I'd say, a few people are below, and then maybe more people I guess are above than below.
Okay.
But at a certain point, it's up or out. So
Sure.
If you don't push, it's kind of a mutual understanding, I guess. But just kind of recognizing like, hey, you don't need to be a 5. The sacrifice to be a 5 and be distinctive and be at the top of your class is such a big sacrifice. And if you really want to, push to be an engagement manager and then associate partner, you can rise so quickly if you're a 5 and you're pushing and you're pushing. And I think that's a wonderful thing about the company, that the people who really do want it takes so much work, and you really do kind of kill yourself in a way to get there. But having the actual ability to rise up and work for that next level is also something that I think shouldn't be taken for granted, because there are a lot of jobs where I've spoken to friends who maybe are in a less intense job, and they say, hey, I'm asking for feedback, I'm trying to figure out what I could do to rise up, and not having that. I've also heard, I haven't experienced it, but it's also very difficult. But for me, just kind of taking a moment to realize like, hey, I don't think that being a McKinsey engagement manager or associate partner is necessarily what I want to do for my career. It's probably not worth putting in the extra, 10 hours a week to maybe be a 4 if things go really well and I navigate things really well, or, 20 hours a week to be a 5. Also, just knowing that the work can always wait until tomorrow. Nothing is life and death.
Mm-hmm.
If something comes up, you just kind of have to take it in stride. And then over communicate. Communication is paramount in everything you do in life, but especially in a super intense job, being able to tell someone, your manager, who also is a human being, they get things. They might, be pushing and really want to do a good job, so they might be motivated to have everything done on time. But if you come to a human being and you say, hey, I really don't feel well, or ABC is happening in my personal life, I need to, leave at 5 p.m. or, I need to take a sick day tomorrow to just get better. I think it'd really be like a outstanding circumstance for that human being looking at you, with you coming to them and being vulnerable about that, to say, hey, no, you can't do that, or I'm going to take you off this project if you do that. But at the same time, I think also need to kind of establish a little bit of credibility, so people know that you aren't, trying to take advantage of the system, or necessarily like not being forthcoming and truthful for the real reason behind things. But I've never experienced somebody or me opening up to somebody about something that was going on and them saying, don't take the time. I think just kind of becoming comfortable with that can really help find that balance.
I'll say this as well. I think that the focus at a lot of these companies, especially for upward mobility, comes from wanting to make more money, which is commendable in a lot of circumstances. And I think one thing that these companies do exceedingly well is create the perception that almost like you couldn't do it anywhere else, at least for a certain period of time. And I think that inherently, or in that mode of thinking, it's very sinister, because you lock people into thinking that upward mobility at X company is going to be the only way that they can get to X salary number or XYZ. Like, I just want to say that there's if money is an issue, and I know I have friends who are essentially supporting their entire families through a consulting job, and they work very hard. I understand it. My point being, there is money to be made anywhere. This isn't like a hustler grind set sort of thing, but point being, I'm in the fashion industry. I'm tangential, and I speak to a lot of influencers. Certain influencers make $80,000 a month. That is what they do. I love a lot of my friends. This isn't me talking down in the industry, because it is something that I love, but this isn't necessarily an industry where people have to be super well read or hyper literate or anything of the sort. You just need to be entertaining, and some people are incredibly good at that. I know of a guy who's sort of like the peak of the peak, who made like $13 million in a year for business. Like, my point being, and I've made this amount of money from fashion. It's something that I love to do. Yeah, sorry. That was for the video listeners, I guess. But I'm not in it to go
Yeah.
and make money. I've been given like free shoes. That's super cool.
Yeah.
Really sweet. We pay our video editor with proceeds from, our paid subscription. Like none of it goes through me. I just have to pay tax on all of it. So technically I'm negative. But point being, for anybody looking at these industries as sort of like a way out and up, I think that's great. And I think it can serve as a great stepping stone. But don't let greed or avarice like dominate your method of thinking, and just understand that you have these skills. You're incredibly proficient, or you can be incredibly good at what you do. There are other places to go and apply those skills that will maybe allow you to have more of a social life, and you'll take a slight bump in that salary, but a salary is not the defining characteristic of your life.
Yeah, and I guess really going from A to B here,
Sure.
I'd love to hear a little bit more kind of about, I wouldn't say your work after that, but kind of your passion within the fashion industry.
Yeah.
Maybe just a kind of quick story about how did you really become interested in it? And, one thing that I'd say I love my clothing. When I put this on, this is from my college at Yale. This is Jonathan Edwards College. You were there too. I'd say I definitely love my clothing and it makes me feel good, but I don't necessarily wake up in the morning and really have any sort of advanced thinking around how I might style it. It's how I love the shirt. I want to wear it today. But how did you get into fashion, and how did, as your knowledge of fashion evolved, how did the way you dress change? And then what are the positive impacts that you've actually found on fashion in your life? Because I think when you love the way you look and you love the clothes you're wearing, it does have a tangibly positive impact on your mental health.
Yeah, I'll take those one, two, and three. It was our mom that got us interested in it. She's always dressed really well and had, I think, very good taste. And I think people can dress well but not have good taste.
Shout out to you, Mom. Love you.
Our mom is always dressed incredibly well. And, not to like shit on our dad, I don't think he ever thought twice about anything he's ever worn. So I think that was part of it. Seeing my mom really take consideration of what she wore and put some emphasis in that. And if I'm really intellectualizing it, I think that part of it was also playing golf for a long time, where there was an emphasis on like a dress code and looking a certain way, and having to look a certain way to sort of gain entry, and elitism be aside, or elitism laid aside, whatever that may be. I think that was an emphasis for me growing up, and then just my interests growing up as well sort of led me to it. And then when I was in high school, I was always sort of very heavy, but I lost a lot of weight around my senior year, and it became something where I could then engage with the clothes that I wanted to engage with. At the same time, I was spending time on forums and reading about it. With one of my friends, we built a bot to buy Yeezy 350s, which were sort of like the hot shoe at the time, and make money. And so I had some money on hand. I was like, well, I'll see what I can do. And so that's sort of what got me interested in it. And then sort of the journey to dressing well, or, I still joke that I don't dress well, but there's sort of like a horseshoe effect where I think people that know nothing about fashion can sometimes be the best dressed. Like you see, an old guy who's just been wearing the same suits since 1993, and he's, they fit him perfectly. He looks great. They're tailored well. But he could not tell you who Raf Simons was, right? He likes his suit that he got from Neiman Marcus or whatever in 1993. And then you get to the middle where people know enough about it, but there becomes almost an obsession with a brand or wearing certain things or status signaling with other things, and becoming almost obsessed with that. There was a trend called logomania, which sort of saw the massive explosion in that. And that was sort of not necessarily driven, but perpetuated, especially within men's fashion, within rap culture. A lot of sort of strategic aligning by brands to be included in certain scenarios or mentions to sort of push their elitism forward. It's not just rap music, it's music in general and culture in that way. But I think I'm at the stage now where I really know what I like, and I'm after things that allow me to connect with things that I enjoy outside of fashion a lot deeper, or inherently just deeper. So one of the things that I collect are Daft Punk shirts and Daft Punk merch, like rare little things. It's something I spend 10 minutes every day looking for. I have alerts set. I know people who will send me like, hey, I saw this, maybe you'd want it. And I was like, oh yeah, I would actually.
Get your foot out of Leo's face. Come on. He's sleeping.
But I love Daft Punk. Again, our mom was
Yeah.
the person that got me into it. She got me a vinyl record when I turned 13 for my bar mitzvah. And it really agreed with me. I love their music. I think that it's a really cool story. And for a long time, I was just a fan of the music.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're not making music anymore. They've sort of disbanded as a group. But through collecting certain things, I've bumped into certain people who are super knowledgeable. Through eBay, I met a radio DJ who was DJing in the 90s and early 2000s who was like, oh yeah, if you like them, you should check this out. Also, did you know this? I have X or Y or Z or some rare sample, you should check this out. So I think using fashion less as a way to status signal or virtue signal or wealth signal, like, I don't own anything that I don't think anybody on the street would see and be like, oh, that's Chanel or Gucci or anything like that. I very rarely wear jewelry, if at all. But I use it more as a way to just signal to other people, in my opinion, who may be interested in the same things that I am a fan of said things.
Yeah. I'd say my fashion taste is more kind of, as I said before, someone gives something for me or I buy something for myself, and there's just, I guess, a positive feeling associated with it. I wear this bracelet a lot.
Yeah, it's what we got you 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
2018, so...
Damn, holy shit.
Ago. Yeah, and it just says, we love you, my birthday that year, and then BSL, which is obviously the initials of our siblings, but, I just try to, I guess, wear things that make me happy to be wearing them, and I'm curious, how long does it take you to get dressed in the morning?
35 seconds.
35 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, so, I'll connect it back. I think it is an interesting application to sort of finance and the industry in general, but I have things that I know go well together. Like, I love this sweater. If you really want me to go deep into it, it's a Japan exclusive Dior knit from 2013. They only made 2 of them. I found it by accident. It was $60. The person was just like, it's cool. I was like, oh, it's cool. Sure. Bought it, did some research, and I was like, oh my God, shit, right? I've stumbled onto something cool. And I think that a lot of my favorite purchases that I've ever made in the fashion industry have not been things that I've sought out because they've been very expensive, but just that I've seen, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, why not? And that's sort of, you end up, I think, by having good taste or an eye for things that you really like, finding things that really agree with that. And while not monetarily expensive, this resale on this, somebody offered me $10. And I was like, get fucked. Yeah. But, it's something that I think makes you more confident, makes you feel more like you when you're wearing things that you're comfortable in and that are worn in by you as well. They fit better. They fit better on your body. Inherently, they'll sort of exaggerate your proportions, right? Like, it really gives you a nice shape, especially if you get things tailored. And so one of the things that I did while I was at Morgan Stanley is I wore a full suit and tie every day, just sort of overkill. But at least mentally to me, the like psychological effect is like, it's very serious. It's very intentional. I want to show that I'm being respectful of the work. Yeah. I personally really didn't like, we had client meetings or meetings with the sales team and they'd come in with like unbuttoned blue button downs with no undershirts and like pants that didn't fit, and, like shitty shoes, hadn't shaved or
it's like you're describing me, but
no, but the point is, like, if you're going to be somebody who is public facing and meeting with clients, I think that it is important to at least put up an effort to show that you've cared and thought about it. And I think that sort of starts either subconsciously or consciously with the way that you dress. And if this is maybe just me personally, but walked into a room and I was with somebody who wanted me to pay, I don't know what McKinsey's going rate is, $300,000 for your advisory services, and sitting in the room were 6 guys who look like they just rolled out of bed and what they slept in, I'd be like, well, maybe they're very smart and do what they do, but I don't feel like respected in this situation. I'd really, want them to feel, for that amount of money, you want to feel like they're taking it seriously. Again, there's a huge conversation on this. I'll probably write about it at some point, but almost like the glorification of people who don't necessarily dress super well, and like the tech CEO-ification of fashion where like, oh, he's in like board shorts and a t-shirt, therefore he must be so smart. He like doesn't even think about it. Like, I think it is interesting to think about and talk about. But at least personally, and maybe I'm just old school, I just thought it brought or signaled to other people in the office that I was taking it seriously, and that started in my morning taking an extra 10 minutes to get out a suit, shave my face, whatever it was. I think that that's one of the really interesting effects that fashion has, in that it signals to other people and to yourself, I think, what is important and can make you feel more or less confident inherently. There have been really cool studies that show, I think it's with suits and ties, that, or just like power dressing, make you feel more confident. And I think it changes your language. People's body language changes as well. You know, there are small things that would happen in the office, and the last thing I would want is to walk into a meeting either with a superior or with a client while I was at any job and feel like I was worrying about the way I looked or the way that I smelled or the way, you know, anything like that. I would almost want that to contribute to my confidence in anything else. That's sort of the not so short summary, but why I think it's really interesting and why I enjoy fashion as a whole.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
I think one last thing to wrap up here is, you know, now that you are back at grad school, obviously the program is intense. From the outset, it seems like you have a little bit more flexibility and control of your own time. What are you doing kind of for exercise, fitness? Do you do anything deliberately for your mental health, such as meditating? You know, how have you gotten back into the flow of things after, you know, leaving your fellowship?
Yeah, so school was a lot. I always overexert myself with classes, which is kind of stupid. I took, you know, you're supposed to take 4, 4, and 4 over 3 semesters. I took 6, 4.5, and then technically 6 again. I tend to overestimate what I'm capable of just in terms of like hours in the day. And so things that I do for mental health, when I get stressed and overwhelmed, I get my work done, but then I end up spending a lot of time on my phone. It's almost like trying to decompress, but not actually doing it. So I bought an iPod Nano to like get my phone out of my hands. Sometimes when I go out or go downtown or run errands, I'll just leave my phone at home. Like there's nothing that pressing in my life. God forbid, like somebody gets sick and falls ill, you know, I think that could maybe wait 20, 30 minutes while I'm running an errand. But just getting my phone out of my hand, I think, has been a big step. I try and run quite a bit. Gyms in New York are expensive.
Where's your favorite place to run in the city?
I just run up and down the West Side Highway. So I'm up on 157th, and I'll run down to the bottom of the West Village. It's like 8 or 9 miles.
8 or 9 miles total?
Yeah.
Okay, so like 4.5 miles down, 4.5 miles back?
No, I just run straight down, and then I'll take the train back up.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Or you just do the Central Park.
Pretty sweaty on the train?
It's not too bad. I mean, I'll like wear a hoodie, pop it off, and then on the train, put it back on.
Makes
and
sense,
then also I run at the time of, like, who's on the train at like 2 p.m. On a Monday, right? Like, but it's so cold. We're in the middle of like an Arctic blast, I think it's called. So I just cannot go outside. And even the treadmill in the basement of my building is, you know, the room isn't heated, so it's like 30 degrees in there.
I do this thing, I'm sure, I mean, you obviously know, but called rucking, which is just walking with a weighted vest. And when I went out yesterday, since I had been away for 2 weeks around the holiday, and I've been trying to lift weights a little bit more, but coming back in the new year, I realized I want to, you know, deliberately build that in and not just do it when it's nice out and the sun is shining. And I was shocked by how many people were in Central Park. There was a ton of people running. Yeah. At one point, there was a group of maybe like 50 to 70 cyclists that were cycling in a group.
There's a huge thing with like racing around the loop. It's super cool. But yeah. I should probably get in a rucking. I mean, I walk Leo for like 3 miles every day. It'd be a good thing to just work in.
Yeah. How have you thought, you know, obviously we have such a wonderful support system within our family that, you know, our mom sometimes can take Leo, or our grandmother when you're super swamped. But, you know, when you do have Leo, there is a significant time investment that comes with having a dog.
Yep.
It's not like if you don't want to feed them or walk them one day, you can't do it.
Yep.
How do you balance, I think, you know, a lot of the positive impacts? I mean, having a dog certainly just makes you happy. I think getting outside to walk the dog, actually giving them walks rather than just taking them out to let them pee is extremely healthy. You're getting your steps in, you're getting outside. Then you also do need to, you know, also worry about getting all those things done. So have you found that having a dog, you know, has impacted your life?
It's hard. I mean, so really quickly to wrap up things that I do for my mental health, and I you know, I'll tie them in. I've tried to meditate for 45 minutes to an hour every day, just lie down and close my eyes, and it's hard. And I started by just doing it to music and just lying and like consciously just listening to whatever I was listening to and sort of letting that start. And then lying for 30 minutes and then just like eyes closed, hands folded, focusing, being present, and that's hard. You know, it's a lot. There's some stuff that comes up that's upsetting, and then going off of that, I call a therapist once a week, which has been incredible. It's been, I think, 7 or 8 years that I've been doing that, and has been, I think, the largest thing, I think, sort of unlocked me. It's really made me more confident in myself, both socially and physically, and I think really clarified some of my behavioral patterns and made it clear to me where and how I can improve, which has been great. So with Leo, he is very time intensive just as a dog. He usually needs like 2 walks a day. He sleeps with me in bed. If he doesn't get those things and I'm not feeding him on time, and I am, even if I there are times that I will take him out for a walk at night, take him out to pee. If I get back too late, he'll just pee in my bed, which, upsets me to no end, and he's been better about it, but is usually a sign that I'm not doing enough for him.
Yeah.
So in all other respects, very well behaved dog. But point being, I think it does really force you to be very intentional with your time. And there are times where you're just, everybody gets depressed. Seasonal depression hits very hard. There was a week where I was like kind of sick, kind of battling like a head cold, just like couldn't take him outside, and we were just in bed all day together. And I was like, I feel terrible. Trying to make it out, you're like shuffling around outside, feeling like some sort of zombie. Like, there are times where you have to sort of scale it back, or you have to we'll call my mom and say, hey, finals are coming up. I really just need like a week where I'm going to be in the library for 12 hours a day. And like, I have a friend who can take him outside, but not every day. Would you just look after him? And have been very lucky, but I don't think getting a dog is for everybody. I think the perception is, it's just super easy. You just take them outside twice a day, you feed them whatever, it's, yada, yada, yada. But no, like, you have to be very intentional, train them, keep up with training, make sure they're healthy, make sure nothing's wrong, keep an eye on them. It's a lot. So I think he's been incredible for me. I got him and trained him as a service dog, and I don't think he's ever once had to do what I trained him to do. I talk with my therapist, but essentially like the mental security and acuity that he gives me by just being present, knowing that there's a fallback is like enough to stave off.
You mentioned, obviously, you'll walk a lot with Leo. You'll run pretty significant distances down the West Side Highway. Are you doing any anaerobic exercise, like lifting weights or anything?
So I have been struggling with a problem with my shoulder, and then I cracked a bone in my hand, which has sort of kept me from gripping anything hard. The hand is healed, shoulder should be fixed in January, and I loved lifting. I was lifting a lot my senior year of college, and when I moved to Boston, I had set goals. I was squatting like 185 to 200. I was bench pressing like 165, and then I was deadlifting like 315 for reps.
Is that 1 rep max or?
Squat, I think all of them were at least 3. I think 1 rep max is like a bad measure of how strong you are. But it was like really, I think, making progress. I weigh about 180 pounds. I was like 205 at the time.
Oh, wow.
A lot of that was just from eating a lot as well, like not purely muscle mass. But I do miss it a lot. I do think it's really important, and I would like to get back to it. I've just honestly been very lazy about it, and I find it much easier to go and make time to go play basketball or go run than I do to go lift weights, which feels, obviously there's similar time investments, but it's more fun to be outside and like run down the West Side Highway than it is to just stand there and jerk weights around.
And I guess the last thing I'll ask you is, I noticed coming up here that you're right near Rucker Park, and I played there a little bit. I played there a little bit in leagues growing up, but will you ever just go there and play, or is it?
I am not good enough for Rucker Park. Okay. If there are runs there, I will be like run and defense and pass guy, and maybe get like a slip on like a backdoor cut and get a layup.
We played in that Cookies Fall Classic, and that was an intense atmosphere. I think one thing, my biggest takeaway there is that in high school, I was a center. In high school, I'm 6'1 3/4. At that time was about 190 pounds, and I could compete in Section 1. I think we're Class AA or the biggest set of schools, but I was normally outsized and always playing kind of small. In that Cookies Fall Classic, I was literally just getting bullied. I was the biggest guy on our team, or playing the center, and I think the game we lost, actually, every single possession, the other team had some guy, maybe he's 6'7", 6'8", probably had 50 or 60 pounds on me, every possession, they would give him the ball, and he would back me down.
They were also like not calling. I
was trying to take charges. They weren't calling the charges,
but they were calling fouls on you, which is kind of crazy.
I mean, I was fouling him, but I was also trying to draw a charge.
He was also lowering his shoulder and throwing. I mean,
it's okay. If you've gotten this long in the podcast, thanks for entertaining this.
There was Cookies Fall, wonderful event. The way it works is they invite a bunch of New York City based, I'd say groups, but usually like restaurants will play. We played for, I worked very briefly for Giaquan Consulting, which is a fashion PR consulting firm. And they called me and they're like, hey, we need guys. You worked for us. Like, you have a W-2. Right? So, we need one more guy or potentially two. Would you know anybody? I called G. I was like, would you come play? Great. So we were there. Lucien was there, to use them as an example. And there was a guy there who played for Lucien, who I've never seen in or around Lucien, who was 6'10". I asked. Yeah. I'd maybe guess what, like 260?
He was like a pro, very high level overseas player. Yeah. There was a guy who played at NC State.
Yep. Point being, like, obscene high level of competition. Like, these guys didn't work at Lucien. Yeah. But very fun. Great experience. I was very, very happy to do it. I hope they do another one. But I don't even know how I got it. Oh, mental health. Like those more active, like sports or running or things like that, are usually at least more enjoyable for me. Yeah. I like being in the gym. I like lifting weights, but I can find it very monotonous. Yeah.
And the group aspect of it as well, just like playing on a team.
Exactly.
And also that was a beautiful fall day, being out there in the sun. Definitely had a pretty big crowd there. It was really fun.
Yeah. I mean, but again, I think bringing it back to work and sort of what we do, it'd be really hard to find time. I mean, that was, we got there at 11 or 12?
Yeah, it was a Saturday afternoon, and I think you said it starts around 11. It actually ended up starting somewhere around 12:30.
Yeah, but it ran until like a full day. 5 or 6.
Yeah, that was like a full day activity. And then I remember finishing that, and my girlfriend was there, and we walked around the shops a little bit, and I thought, hey, she just came to this for me. I should probably suck it up and go, walk around some stores down there on the Lower East Side with her. Yeah. But I remember for like the next 2 days, my body had felt like it'd just been hit by a bus. And so, those things, while they are super fun, I've realized, keeping up with consistent exercise, both weightlifting, running, but then also doing those activities like playing hoops every couple weeks, so that when I do go and play, it's not like, I've played one time in every 3 months and then I can barely move for the next couple of days.
It's important. I mean, you've heard about the most common injury for men in business school, right?
What is it? Tearing their ACL first time coming back to playing a sport?
Yeah, they a lot of guys will go back to business school after working at like McKinsey or at a bank for a couple of years as sort of like a time off. And obviously have not done a lot of strenuous exercise, have been at the desk. But, a lot of people who go and work, played sports in college. And they'll come back, and first game, they will try and do something that they were very accustomed to doing and just destroy an ACL. Yeah. And so the ongoing joke, I talked to a friend who was at HBS, like 2 or 3 people within the first 2 weeks torn their ACL. Wow. Which is crazy. Yeah. Yeah, so sort of, I guess it's not funny if somebody's tearing their ACL, but I guess slightly humorous, point. But definitely an emphasis. Try and take care of your physical health and do things, like playing basketball that don't make it necessarily seem like it's just doing something for the sake of doing it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Stroll. If you like this episode and would like to be in the loop for future episodes while also supporting the podcast, please subscribe here and follow the podcast on social media for updates. The podcast is active across all major social media platforms, including YouTube, and our handles are either The Stroll_podcast or The Stroll_pod. I'd like to give another big thank you to Sol for coming on the podcast and being willing to engage in the open and honest dialogue that we did. I'd also like to take a moment to thank BB Thompson, Sol Thompson again, and Liz Jarecki for their support and bringing this podcast to where it is today. Lastly, thank you again for listening. Much love, one love.